The story began with a man bleeding heavily, struggling to breathe. He thought about how far they had come, even as laser beams rained down around them. He held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could defeat the enemy. But in an instant, something pierced his chest. He froze, and it took him a moment to realize there was now a gaping hole where his heart should be. Dropping to his knees, he understood that the strike was a deadly blow. He collapsed face first onto the ground, his mind lingering on the bitter thought that he would die without accomplishing anything. His blurry eyes fixed on a flying humanoid creature, the one mankind feared the most, known as the Liquidator. One day, this unknown being had appeared and wiped out an entire continent. In response, humanity had formed a special group to defend themselves against such monsters. The first member was a man renowned for surviving a massive meteor strike without a scratch, protected only by his shield. Because of this, he was called the world's protecting shield, Brian Millier. The second was a woman with powers equal to an entire division, the great sage Bella Albright. Alongside her was an archer who once felled a high-level dragon in a single shot, Jacob Bloomfield, the divine archer. Then there was the strongest swordsman to ever exist, the sword saint, Amy White. And then there was another group, the support unit. Corpses already littered the battlefield. Among them lay a dying soldier, the footman Gray Lee. He believed that those in the support unit were nothing but sacrificial pawns. Watching the elite fighters in action, he admitted they were on a level far beyond his imagination. He had always known graduates of the World Union Academy were exceptional, but the difference between them was overwhelming. The elites unleashed a barrage of attacks against the Liquidator. Gray felt useless, questioning if their presence in battle even mattered. Meanwhile, Amy White pressed the attack, her sword flashing with incredible speed. Gray gritted his teeth as tears welled up, the painful gap between them making him feel powerless. The Liquidator skillfully evaded Amy's strikes until, at last, one blade grazed him. Impressed, he acknowledged her strength and then became serious. With a single swift strike, he cut Amy clean in half. Blood gushed as her body fell lifelessly to the ground. Gray's eyes widened in horror. He realized then that the Liquidator had only been toying with them up until that moment. The truth was undeniable. They stood no chance of winning. Lying in a pool of his own blood, Gray was shocked to still be alive even though his heart had been pierced. As his blood dripped onto the ground, a faint voice reached him, whispering, "I finally found you." The drop of blood transformed into a small light that grew into a message. It called out for Gray, declaring that he possessed great power. He suddenly found himself awake in a strange place. Darkness stretched endlessly around him, broken only by ancient stone structures. He wondered if this was the afterlife. At the center sat a figure on a throne, its presence overwhelming. The being wore black clothing with horns upon its head and a golden mark on its chest. Its expression was calm and stoic like that of a god. The creature told Gray that he had not perished, informing him that his physical wounds were healed. Confused, Gray saw an image of his own mangled body displayed before him and asked if the creature had healed him. The figure replied that it was not his doing, but rather Gray's own hidden power. The words only deepened Gray's confusion, but the being admitted that even it could not properly analyze his ability. What it knew for certain was that Gray's power surpassed even the Liquidators, if he could learn to control it. When Gray asked if this meant victory was possible, the being said he should not place high hopes on such an outcome. Still, it believed the Liquidator must be defeated. Rising from his throne, the being pierced Gray's chest. A glowing magic circle appeared, spreading light through his body as the voice declared it would lend him its power. Gray woke up, lying again upon his bloodied corpse. Grasping his sword, he saw its tip wrapped in a dark energy. The voice explained that what he saw was his own power, though invisible to ordinary eyes. Understanding, Gray steadied himself. The Liquidator noticed him and was shocked to see him rise again. Without hesitation, Gray slashed at him, his strike leaving a wound across the monster's chest. Realizing he could inflict damage, Gray pressed forward, confident his power was stronger. The Liquidator warned him not to underestimate his enemy. In the blink of an eye, Gray's body was severed in half, blood spraying violently. The Liquidator commended him for forcing him to fight seriously. Then, unexpectedly, a black mist filled the battlefield. A hooded man appeared, his form resembling a black flame, his face hidden behind a mask. dusk. He carried an enormous dark blade. Confused, the liquidator raised a barrier, but when the black flames parted, Gray's figure was revealed once more. The liquidator demanded to know if he was truly human. Gray only glared in silence before attacking again. His blade shattered the monster's barrier and left another wound across its body. When questioned again, Gray answered that he too wondered if he was still human. As the duel raged, the liquidator admitted Gray's strength was remarkable, though it vowed to crush him repeatedly until he stayed dead. Gray's counterattack drew yellow blood, and the liquidator called him a monster, yet it still refused to fall. Light gathered around the creature as a massive magic circle formed. It declared that time had run out. As Gray gripped his massive sword tightly, darkness spread across the battlefield, turning day into night. The liquidator proclaimed that within the plane of true dusk, nothing could harm him. He told Gray to stop resisting and admire the stars instead. Gray's eyes widened as a radiant star shone brightly above, growing larger until it resembled the sun. Then it plummeted from the heavens. The impact was cataclysmic, leaving a massive crater. Gray was nowhere to be found, and the liquidator believed him finally reduced to dust. But before it could celebrate, a portal formed in the sky, transforming into a colossal magic clock. A voice echoed. It was Kronos. He acknowledged the immense power gathered and declared it was enough to send Gray back. Furious, the liquidator cursed at him. Kronos explained that he had no strength left, but would send Gray to the past, entrusting him with the world's fate. The magic clock ticked backward. As it reached 1, light consumed Gray. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on soft grass under a bright sky. Confused, he sat up and realized he was in Renato Village, his hometown, destroyed 15 years ago. Memories of Kronos' words confirmed it. He had truly been sent back to the past. Looking at his arm, he saw the old injury that had marked him since childhood. At that time, he had been bullied relentlessly by Belder and his gang. This time, he resolved not to be beaten by them. While walking in the forest, he encountered them. Belder, the biggest of the bullies, stood at the front with 3 others. He mocked Gray, saying he had gone through trouble just to find him. With a smirk, he threw a sword at Gray's feet and ordered him to pick it up. Gray hesitated, refusing by claiming his wound had not yet healed. He thanked them for the invitation, but insisted he could not fight. Belder dismissed his words, pointing out that the blade was blunt. Gray reasoned that even a blunt weapon was still iron and could cause injury. Enraged, Belder shouted at him to shut his mouth. He said Gray had no right to refuse and could fight barehanded if he disliked swords. Then he charged forward, clearly intent on causing harm rather than engaging in a mock battle. Gray remembered what a military doctor once told him, that his lack of progress in swordsmanship stemmed from an injury he sustained in childhood. Reflecting on it, he realized that had been the beginning of his downfall. Belder's sword swung toward him, but Gray sidestepped with ease. Annoyed, Belder struck again, but Gray slipped past his blade. Realizing it was not Belder who had become slower, it was he himself who had become faster. The bullies gasped in shock, remarking that Gray seemed like a completely different person. Gray bent down and picked up the sword. He knew that he might not have the body he once possessed, but he carried with him the memories of countless battles he had fought. Belder leapt forward to slash him, yet even when the attack came from behind, Gray skillfully deflected it by swinging the sword with his uninjured hand. Belder was struck and let out a groan, and to Gray's surprise, the blow was enough to throw him off his feet. It made Gray question whether it was even fair to fight against such an amateur. Still, he reminded himself that Belder was not someone who deserved pity. He reasoned that it was these very people who had tormented him in the past simply because he could not fight back. But this time it was different. He attacked, forcing Belder to release his sword. Belder cursed aloud, and seeing how easily he had let go, Gray concluded that he was worse than an amateur. Gray remarked that Belder probably had never been trained to properly receive a blow from a sword. Gray stepped in front of Belder and assured him there was nothing to worry about as he gripped the weapon. He added that since the blade was dulled, it would be completely safe to beat someone with it. Belder was struck again, and this time his shoulder bled. Shocked, he cried out as blood splattered across his face, falling to his knees. Gray hadn't expected such a result, especially after checking the sword and finding it completely blunt. If it had been sharp, Belder might actually have been killed. Gray glared at him and continued his assault. Belder was struck on the nose and bled heavily before collapsing onto his back. Gray kept using the blunt edge of the blade, towering over Belder, and asked why he was screaming so much. He pointed out that Belder had no right to complain, since he was the one who had said a blunt sword was safe. Gray grinned devilishly, causing Belder to tremble in fear. Belder yelled at his three companions to stop standing around and attack, but they were hesitant, frightened by how much stronger Gray had suddenly become. One of them suggested attacking together from behind, and soon they surrounded him. Gray asked if they wanted another round, while Belder shouted at them to kill him. Gray admitted that he was originally going to overlook them, but then he changed his mind. The peaceful forest soon echoed with the sounds of their struggle. When it was over, all four bullies were left bruised, with large bumps on their heads, barely able to open their eyes. They knelt meekly, resting their hands on their laps. Gray remembered how frightened he had once been of these very people. He asked if they were from the serious swordsmanship dojo. Belder reluctantly admitted it was something like that, while another confessed that they had stopped attending because they already felt strong enough. Gray questioned what their definition of strong enough even meant. He realized he should not expect much from the dojo itself, but still, it might prove useful. He demanded that they introduce him, since entry was by referral only. Belder refused, saying that if his master found out he had lost, the consequences would be unbearable. Gray swung his sword in front of Belder, suggesting they simply continue their fight. Terrified, Belder bolted, yelling that the dojo was in a certain direction. His three companions cried out not to be left behind and hurried after him. As they entered the city, Belder asked Gray why he wanted to join a dojo. Gray explained that the dojo had a recommendation slot for the academy. Belder confirmed he had heard of such a thing, and Gray told him that was exactly why he wanted to go. One of the lackeys remarked that Gray was already strong enough without the academy, but Gray admitted it would be nice if that were true. He knew better, though. Even the world's strongest warriors had been powerless against the Liquidator, and even when he had used Kronos' power, he had been unable to harm it once it became serious. He wondered how strong he truly needed to become to defeat such a monster, though he felt he had some clues. Belder then pointed toward the dojo, and Gray nodded. He recalled that in his brief clash with the Liquidator, he had managed to control that dark power for a moment, focusing it through the swordsmanship he had learned from the Sword Saint. If he had spent more time training under similar conditions, he believed the outcome might have been different. He realized this was precisely why Kronos had sent him back. When they arrived at the dojo, a woman overheard their voices. She demanded to know if these fools had truly tried to bully a civilian using the swordsmanship they had learned from her, only to be utterly defeated. Clicking her tongue in disappointment, she revealed herself as the dojo's instructor, Saria. Belder tried to excuse their behavior by calling it a mock battle, but Saria struck him with such force that he was hurled into the wall. The other three widened their eyes in shock and trembled. She dismissed Belder's excuse, declaring that if he considered beating up an unarmed person a mock battle, then what she had just done should also be considered one. She pointed her sword at his eyes, commanding him to leave and never return. From that moment, none of them were allowed to call themselves her students. Terrified, they agreed and fled. Saria then sat in front of Gray and apologized, acknowledging that her former students had caused him trouble. Gray replied that there was no need to worry. She thanked him for his understanding before shifting to the matter of his request for a recommendation to the academy. She explained that although she wished to make up for what had happened, she could only recommend him after confirming his ability. Handing him a wooden sword, she told him to take the first move whenever he was ready. Gray attacked, and Saria carefully evaluated his technique. She saw that his swordsmanship was unusually practical for someone his age, as though he had already survived countless battles. When she countered, he managed to deflect her strike. She quickly understood that Belder and his companions were no match for him. Though his style appeared largely self-taught, at times his movements mirrored techniques from the academy. It made her wonder if he had received instruction before. His swordplay was rough, but she could see the talent. He was a diamond in the rough. Their spar continued. She struck, he countered, their wooden blades clashing again and again. To her surprise, Gray did not falter and easily kept pace with her. What began as a simple test of skill slowly forced her to draw out more of her strength. A strange feeling crept over her, fear. For the first time, a boy had made her uneasy. Gray swung so powerfully that she was forced back. She dismissed it as a wild swing, but when she spotted a weakness in his stance, She lunged, intending to end the match. But then, to her shock, her sword was cut in half. Gray was equally stunned, recognizing the same sensation he had once felt in battle. It meant the power was still within him, yet the cost was immediate. A searing pain tore through his body, and he collapsed to his knees. Alarmed, Saria rushed to ask what was wrong. Gray realized that his body could not keep up with the power. His legs trembled, but he forced himself upright, claiming he was fine. Inwardly, he took note not to use that power recklessly again. He considered telling Saria the truth, but seeing her puzzled expression, he decided against it. He doubted she would believe him anyway, so he excused his feat by saying he had simply gotten carried away. Saria, however, knew it was impossible to split her blade with a dull wooden sword, and she was certain Gray knew it too. When she caught him staring, she asked what was wrong, but quickly realized he had no intention of explaining. Instead, she returned to the topic of his request for a recommendation. Gray confirmed that he had heard she could write one. Saria replied that she could indeed recommend him to the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship, the kingdom's finest educational institution, but she admitted she would not advise it, as she did not believe he was suited for such a place. Her words stung, confirming his own insecurity about his lack of strength, especially since he could do little apart from that single moment. Yet Saria reassured him that there was another place more fitting, the World Union Academy. Gray's eyes widened in shock. She explained that he should not settle for being the kingdom's best, but instead belong to the world's greatest institution. The thought overwhelmed him. He knew that it was the very academy where the Sword Saint and the others had come from. He asked if someone like him could truly be accepted there, and Saria answered bluntly that it was impossible. His body, she explained, was far too unfit to wield a sword. She acknowledged that at the Royal Academy, he might be able to fake his way through with skill, but the World Union Academy would not accept that. She asked how he could possibly have acquired such ability with such a frail body. Gray knew she was right. Everyone in that academy was a true monster, and compared to them, he could not compete as he was. His expression darkened, but Saria noticed and asked why he was giving up already. She reminded him that there were still 9 months before the entrance exam. He argued that 9 months was far too short, but she insisted that even if time was limited, he had to trust her. She asked if he was ready to suffer through those months. Gray admitted that he did not want to suffer, but he made his decision. He entrusted his training to her and vowed to endure the next 9 months. She liked Gray's answer. Her demeanor suddenly changed, which caught him off guard. With a devilish grin, she told him that it would be the start of his hell. Days passed as Gray underwent rigorous training with her. He trained relentlessly, ate both delicious and questionable meals, sparred with her, and continually honed his swordsmanship. He remained determined to make it to the entrance exam on time. 8 months later, the changes were noticeable. Saria could see that he had grown muscular, and with that, she admitted that she had nothing else to teach him. She encouraged him to go out with confidence. Gray was puzzled because there was still a month until the exam. She explained that taking an exam in an unfamiliar place was never easy, which was why it was best for him to get there early. She even gave him money for the trip and for a month's worth of food. Gray hesitated to take it, thinking that going a month early was too soon, almost as if she was chasing him out of the village. She assured him he was just overthinking it. He then brought up the rumor about an ogre's nest being found near the area, which surprised her. He pointed out that there were hardly any guards in the village. Saria tried to play it cool and said it had nothing to do with them. She assured him that help would come from the royal capital, so there was nothing to worry about. She urged him to head to the exam without concerns, but Gray could tell she was lying. He knew no help would ever come, and that before the village was destroyed, his master would lose her life. In his past life, there had been news that she was killed when she went to face the ogre alone. This time, however, he simply told her that he understood what she wanted. He thanked her and said that he would be going. She smirked and wished him well on the exam. Later that night, skeletons were displayed on a tree with sticks piercing through their mouths. Saria showed up in the forest. Following the scout's report, she tracked a blood trail that led into an eerie den. She was about to enter when a voice suddenly asked her where she was going. Looking up, she saw Gray sitting on a branch. He smiled and called her master. She was surprised to see him there and asked what he was doing when he was supposed to be on his way to the academy. Gray asked her the same thing, reminding her that she had said earlier that the ogre nest would be handled by the army from the royal capital. Saria explained that the army could not come because of an emergency, so she decided to deal with it herself. She assured him that she was enough on her own, having already assessed the nest's strength strength from the scout's report. According to her, the boss was an elite ogre, and the nest contained around 40 to 50 monsters in total. She admitted that the number of minions would be tricky. Gray, however, knew the truth. The ogre's real strength lay in its intelligence and leadership. Being surrounded would be suicidal. He was certain of one thing: if he let his master go alone, she would not make it out alive, and the village would be destroyed. He had already seen that future with his own eyes. He insisted on going with her, but she refused, claiming she could handle it alone. He tried to convince her by saying he did not want to miss the chance to gain real combat experience. Then he asked if she thought he would get in her way. That made her laugh because she knew he was well aware he would not. After all, she could no longer defeat him in mock battles. But she reasoned that real fights were unpredictable and a monster's nest was far too dangerous. She insisted that he wait until he had more experience. Gray realized she would not budge, so he proposed another idea. Intrigued, she listened. He told her that if she refused, he would fight her, knock her unconscious, and deal with the ogres himself. Seeing his stance, she realized he was not joking. The dojo went silent. Eventually, she gave up, but laid down one condition: that no matter what happened, he must come back alive. He agreed, but also told her to live. Under the moonlight, they hid behind a boulder, spying on the ogre colony. The terrain offered no escape, proof of the ogre's confidence. But it also meant Gray and Saria had no way out either. Since the monsters were intelligent, Gray decided to proceed cautiously. Saria observed the colony carefully. She did not see the boss, so she assumed it was inside the tent. Their best hope was to thin the numbers before it appeared. She instructed Gray to take out enemies on one side while she handled the other. He agreed, and they charged in. One ogre sensed something. Before it could react, Saria was already upon it, slashing its head clean off. Another ogre saw the head roll across the ground and immediately alerted the others. In no time, a horde came charging. On Gray's side, he cut down enemies one after another with incredible speed. Saria fought with equal ferocity. It was a bloodbath. Eventually, the two regrouped, standing among piles of ogre corpses. She praised him, even questioning if it was really his first time, but Gray brushed it aside and told her to stay sharp. They were only getting started, yet inside, Gray felt uneasy. The ogres were too weak. If that was truly their strength, his master could have handled them alone. The real danger had to be inside the tent. His suspicion was confirmed when a pair of red eyes glowed in the darkness, locking onto him. It made him uneasy. Without hesitation, he told Saria they had to leave immediately. She asked what was wrong, but he shouted for her to just run. Picking up on his fear, she obeyed, and they started to flee. But before they could escape, something leapt over them and landed in front, blocking the way. It was an elite ogre. Saria scoffed, saying it was an honor that the boss came to them personally, but Gray corrected her. It was not the boss. Then came a thunderous roar. Saria instinctively covered her ears. A swarm of ogres poured out, charging in a frenzy. At the back stood a massive ogre, and Gray said it was something far stronger than an elite. It was an ogre general, the true boss of the nest. The elite guarded the exit, while the horde blocked the front. They were trapped. The general did not move, but its presence was overwhelming. Saria knew instantly they could not win. She suggested they take down the one blocking their path and escape. She launched an attack, but her strike was deflected. She tried again, managing to scratch its shoulder, only to watch the wound heal instantly. Gray told her it was useless. The general's roar enhanced the ogre's strength and healing. That was why they felt so much stronger. Now even Saria struggled against a single one. Gray continued fighting, telling her she did not need to win, only to buy him time. She grew worried and asked what he was planning. He said there was only one option left: to take down the ogre general itself. An ogre with an axe clashed against Gray, knocking his sword aside. He grew irritated as they kept trying to flank him. The ogre raised its axe, but Gray jumped back just in time. His sword, however, had broken under the strain. He was relieved to have a spare, but he knew it would not last either. Seeing his plight, Saria tossed him her extra sword. He caught it and thanked her. Now wielding two blades, Gray fought on, but he knew it was still not enough to wipe them all out. He focused only on cutting through the horde toward the general. He moved with precision, slicing through ogres in quick motions. One managed to scratch his cheek, while another tried to overpower him with its axe. Gray pressed harder, refusing to give ground. The ogre general's weapon began to glow, followed by another deafening roar. Gray flinched as the horde grew even stronger. He realized the general had figured out his plan. It was smart, too smart. His sword clashed with another axe, forcing him back, but he kept pushing forward, cutting down every enemy in his path. Suddenly, an ogre tackled him, holding him in place while another raised its axe. Gray slashed its neck, but he realized they were deliberately sacrificing themselves to wear out his swords. Before he could react, another ogre leapt, its massive fist slamming into him. He blocked with his sword, but the impact blasted him away. Coughing blood, Gray trembled as his weapon shattered. He was now down to his last sword. Breathing heavily, he realized there was no way he could win. Yet he told Saria to run while the ogres focused on him. She smirked but shook her head. She could not. While defending, Gray demanded to know if she planned to die for nothing. He assured her he would follow, but she admitted it was not that. With a grim expression, she revealed she could no longer run. Her leg had been slashed, bleeding heavily. Gray turned pale. He was out of options. He had gone back in time with one goal, to defeat the liquidators. Now, swinging his last sword, he thought his life might end here. His blade shattered, yet he refused to give up. He tried to recall that power from before, forcing himself to reach for it again. His ultimate goal burned in his mind, to defeat his enemies. As the ogres readied to strike, he focused everything on remembering how it felt. He tried to recall the feeling he once had. Gray shut his eyes tightly, and as the last shard of his broken sword flew past him, he opened them again, this time glowing red. At that moment, he finally felt it. With a swing of his black shadow sword, he delivered a fatal strike to several ogres. Mist covered part of his face and his blade. Saria was confused. Gray's expression was grim, but when he looked at her, he smiled and told her that everything was all right. With one swing, he severed several heads. The ogre general's weapon began to glow again, but in an instant it was cut down. Saria noticed it, but while she was distracted, an ogre tried to sneak up on her. She realized the attacks felt weak. She remarked that the monsters which once gave her a hard time could now be sliced through with ease. Without the general's boost, she said, they were nothing. By the time the night had deepened, they had finally defeated the ogres. Gray apologized for breaking her sword, but she said she did not mind, especially since he had saved her life. He handed the sword back to her. She was about to ask about the strange power he had used when Gray suddenly collapsed. He fell face down on the ground. Saria panicked and called out his name. Gray's consciousness drifted into a dark realm. He wondered where he was. Everything was pitch black except for a single door in front of him. Looking around in confusion, he saw black flames burn through the chains that bound the door. He recognized it. It was the same power he had tapped into before. He questioned whether opening that door would grant him that strength again, but the thought made him uneasy. Still, he stepped toward it until a terrifying presence appeared behind him. The sensation froze him in place, forcing him to step back. His breathing grew fast and shaky. Deep down, he knew that if he opened that door in his current state, he would die. Then, out of nowhere, a voice told him he had made the right choice. In an instant, he jolted awake, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. Saria was startled but relieved that he was finally awake. He asked where he was, and she explained he was in the village infirmary, adding that he had been unconscious for 5 days. She admitted she had been scared he might never wake up. When he realized how long he had been out, he understood that he had pushed his body too far. Saria said that calling it pushing didn't quite describe what he had done, but setting that aside, she asked if he was able to move. Gray tried, only to discover that he could not summon any strength in his right arm. He could move it with effort, but it worried him. He wondered if he would ever be able to hold a sword again. Worse, there was a strange bruise on his arm that looked like black ink splattered across his skin. Saria expected as much and told him his arm would not heal properly anytime soon. All the bones in his right arm had been shattered. He was shocked. It did not even hurt. She explained that a magic potion had been used to treat it. That stunned him, since magic potions were extremely expensive. She told him not to worry because the village chief had given it to them. Gray could not understand why the chief would provide something so valuable for him. She reminded him that he was the village's hero. Gray was left clueless. At that moment, the village chief burst into the room. Gray immediately thanked him for the potion, but the chief insisted it was they who owed thanks. With great emotion, the chief declared that Gray had fought an ogre general, a monster that even gathered troops from nearby towns could not defeat, and that such a monster had come for their village. Clasping Gray's hand tightly, the chief said that if Gray had not killed it, the village would have been wiped out. He explained that without him, there would be no potion, no infirmary, no survivors. None of them would even be there speaking. Gray replied that he was exaggerating, but the chief insisted he was not. Gray thought about it, and at some point, he agreed with the chief. Before he had regressed, the village had indeed been destroyed by the ogre attack. The chief told him that if he still did not understand how important his actions were, he would gladly explain it all in detail. He then asked if it was true that Gray planned to take the academy entrance exam. Gray responded with surprise. His thoughts raced as he realized he had killed the ogre only a week before the exam and then been unconscious for 5 days. That left just 2 days remaining. He turned pale as he remembered the journey to the academy. It was a 3-day walk, or 1 day by horseback, but he had no money for that. He asked the chief if he could borrow a horse. The chief had anticipated the request and prepared the best horse in the village for him. With it, Gray would arrive in time. Saria joked that if he had not woken up that day, they would have carried him there while he was still asleep. When she opened the door, sunlight made him squint. Outside, he saw the horse waiting and a huge crowd gathered, holding banners, thanking him and wishing him luck. Everyone wore bright smiles expressing their gratitude. Many came forward to thank him personally. One man stepped ahead and handed him a pouch. Gray asked what it was, and the man explained that it was something the entire village had pitched in for, knowing that applying to the World Union Academy was expensive. Gray was deeply touched by the gesture. He smiled, thanked them, and joked that it would be hard to return if he failed. Saria told him not to worry, reminding him that he was the only applicant to the academy who had defeated an ogre general. Yet Gray was still worried about his injured arm. She pointed out that his left arm still worked fine, and he nodded. She said that was more than enough, adding that he did not need to use that dangerous power again. He argued that the exam might not be that simple, since passing with only one arm sounded difficult. Saria reassured him that he would stand out regardless, and the examiners would recognize his strength. She was confident and assured him that he would stand out regardless, and the examiners would recognize his strength. She was confident and told him with certainty that he would pass. He thanked her and said that with her encouragement, he had no choice but to succeed. In his past life, the village had been destroyed, but now it stood strong. Gray realized the world was no longer the same, and that meant the future could change, all because of his power. He was now ready to go. In time, he reached his destination and even thanked the horse for carrying him there. Ahead of him lay a city surrounded by a lake. He had finally arrived at the World Union Academy. At the arena, the host announced that they would begin handing out exam tickets, and until the process was complete, all examinees were to remain in the central arena. The crowd was large, but only 20 would pass. Someone remarked that the number of successful candidates varied each year, sometimes 50, sometimes only 1. The host then called Professor Ariel to the front. She entered and immediately began distributing the tickets. She instructed the examinees to take the papers that appeared before them, then snapped her fingers. A golden light filled the arena, and papers materialized in front of each examinee. Gray received his. He was examinee number 513 under the fencing course. He noticed everyone else had theirs as well. Professor Ariel explained that they would only see their number and course, reassuring them that this was the standard procedure. With a small grin, she added that the academy did not judge based on age, gender, nationality, status, or even names. Only those who passed the exam and earned the right to cross the bridge would be asked for their names, and even then they could give false ones if they wished. Gray was confused. Even though he had left his sword at the inn, his paper still listed him under fencing. It made him wonder what kind of system was being used. Professor Ariel clarified that courses were assigned based on appearance. If she had assigned anyone incorrectly, they should raise their hands. The examinees were stunned. None could believe she had sorted them simply by sight with so many present. Some speculated she had researched them beforehand, while others suspected mind-reading magic. But in the end, no one raised their hand, and she concluded that no one had been misassigned. She then announced the exam schedules and told everyone to check their tickets. Gray's paper showed that he was scheduled for the first day at 11 in the morning. He disliked it, hoping for more time for his arm to heal. Professor Ariel reminded them that it was a one-shot practical exam. Being late meant disqualification, with no exceptions or reschedules. Gray held his arm, realizing he still could not exert much strength, and silently hoped it would improve by tomorrow. The next day arrived, but he was still in a pinch as it had not healed at all. He had no choice but to take the exam in that state. He was called to the arena entrance. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself not to think negatively. His left arm was functional and his right could move somewhat. He used the remaining time to watch the examiner's movements and look for openings. The examiner told the current examinee to make the first move. The examinee charged, his swings heavy, but the examiner simply sidestepped to avoid them. The examinee shouted that he was not finished and gripped his sword with both hands, swinging again. The examiner blocked it effortlessly with just one hand. Seeing this, the examinee's spirit was crushed. The examiner countered with a single strike that blasted him back, knocking him onto the ground. His exam was concluded, and he was instructed to retrieve his weapon and exit the venue. Seeing that, a small smile formed on Gray's face. He already knew it. He was completely done. There was no way in hell he could win. Not long after, the examiner called his number. As he walked toward him, Gray couldn't believe he had to fight someone who had taken down a man twice his size using only one arm. Gray was instructed to make the first move. He felt like he didn't have a chance, but decided to do whatever he could. He charged forward, recalling what Saria had told him, that a sword isn't swung with just the arms, but that he needed to channel power generated by his entire body through them. Even though his right arm was powerless, he drove force through his other muscles. He swung his sword, and the examiner ducked to evade it. Gray felt nervous, knowing he couldn't fight the way he usually did. He thought that if swinging a sword without arm strength were easy, no one would bother training their bodies in the first place. The examiner counterattacked. Gray got confused. The instructor's sword was somewhat slow, allowing him to block it. He could tell that the examiner had insane power, but his speed and technique didn't come close to his master's. He believed that if he relied on the swordsmanship he had learned from her, he might be able to make up for the difference in arm strength. Gray's eyes sharpened, and he moved accordingly. He became certain the examiner was slow and wasn't nearly as strong as he had thought. He recalled his master's words that he would definitely pass. Their swords clashed, and he was able to overpower the examiner. It was at that moment he began to have faith that he could do it. Their sword fight continued. Although Gray had observed the examiner's swordsmanship, he charged while the professor evaded, making him realize the difference in power was too great and he couldn't break the form. He understood it wasn't easy to win with just one hand after all. As they continued sparring, the examiner's movements grew rougher. While Gray had a risky move in mind, he found the right timing and baited him into a wide-open swing, shifting his weight to his right foot, knowing it would leave an opening. He also anticipated that most opponents would go for a big, obvious swing. Unexpectedly, Gray was already behind the examiner. The examiner was caught off guard. Gray knew that no matter the difference in power, if he could get behind, he could defeat him. But suddenly they were ordered to halt. The tip of his sword was only an inch away from the examiner's back. Gray wondered if the match was really over. He thought it was a bit early to stop there. Another examiner announced that the time limit had been reached. Gray's eyes widened as the result was announced. It was a draw. He was sure he wouldn't make it. His grip on the sword loosened, as if his body had given up. He left the arena feeling down, knowing he had given his all. He also realized that if he couldn't win against the examiner, things would be difficult for him. He expected his arm to heal next year and planned to take the exam again. Before leaving, he glanced back one last time and expressed his thanks. 1 week later, in World Union Academy Meeting Room 53, the head of the academy asked the professors for their thoughts on the candidates now that all exams had concluded. One of them expressed exhaustion. An older professor noted that observing everyone together was inefficient and suggested dividing the workload next year. Another defended that they couldn't overlook talent just to make things easier. The head sighed, pointing out he had asked for their thoughts on the examinees, not the system. He started with the swordsmanship course examinees, who had passed. They watched the screens. One professor stated that, as always, those who beat the examiners passed, and the rest would be judged on their quality and performance during the 15-minute time limit. He asked the other swordsmanship instructors for opinions. One replied that besides those who beat the examiner, candidate number 5,217,753 stood out. Another suggested leaving it at that, as others wouldn't be able to keep up in class. The professor agreed and asked if anyone thought otherwise. The meeting continued, and eventually the head confirmed the successful candidates. Then someone asked about candidate number 513. The head glanced at the speaker. It was Professor Ariel. She asked for their thoughts on candidate 513. They all watched the screen. One professor called 513 a little guy. They observed that it looked like he might win, but if he relied on traps to beat the examiner, things would be difficult. They noted his technique was good, but his strength lacking, making him seem outmatched from the start. The brown-haired professor with a mustache said he wasn't strong. They all agreed. Professor Ariel was speechless. She couldn't believe so many had watched, and yet no one noticed. She thought if everyone is blind, observing together is a waste. The next day, Gray held his exam ticket. The swordsmanship course results were finally announced. Only 6 people passed. Everyone waited nervously. The first to be called was candidate number 5. Their exam ticket burned. Then came candidate 217, followed by numbers 432, 615, 753, and 925. That was it. Gray looked crushed when his number wasn't called. Successful candidates were told told to cross the bridge and finish enrollment by the end of the day. Gray was downcast while others cheered. He wore a heartbroken expression after failing. Then another announcement came, the Divine Eye special admission. Seconds later, Gray's number was called, and his exam ticket burned in blue flames. Everyone was shocked. Gray stood frozen, completely confused. People in the crowd sneered. It was Gray's first time hearing about this special admission. Some claimed the Academy must have cheated, saying the World Union Academy had sunk to a new low. Gray overheard them, confused. He wondered if his master had done something, but he hadn't heard anything. An old man scolded the crowd for talking like that about Divine Eye admission, saying it was a prestigious category that produced heroes for centuries. The crowd didn't buy it, arguing it was only respected long ago. They pointed out recent Divine Eye picks, Amy White, Bella Albright, Leek Muller, and Jacob Bloomfield, and called them failures. Even current candidates had heard the stories, but Gray knew better. Those three were part of the main force that fought against the Liquidator. Now his name stood beside theirs. An announcement stated that the entrance ceremony would begin in 30 minutes. Once students finished changing, they were asked to gather in the plaza in front of the main office. Their uniforms had a black path with the Academy symbol engraved on it. Gray looked dashing. Some students arrived early at the plaza, but weren't sure if it was the right place since nothing was set up yet. A man ran toward them and apologized for the delay, explaining there had been a mix-up. He asked the students to step back so he could place stairs. They complied. The man said it was perfect, then knelt down. A large magic circle appeared, and the ground started to shift. The students' jaws dropped, shocked to see a full structure rise right in front of them. The man apologized again and told them they could sit wherever they liked. The students were clearly amazed, realizing it was teleportation magic, but couldn't believe something that big could be teleported. Gray sat down, thinking the school probably wanted the ceremony held where the building could be seen. To him, it felt like an extravagant use of teleportation magic. He was clearly excited, realizing how powerful the World Union Academy was. The students noticed there were too many seats. Only 30 students were accepted, so it seemed unnecessary. The girl Gray was talking to was surprised. She offered to explain that the Academy gathers top students from around the world. Then she pointed at the sky. The other girl was shocked to see aircraft and dragons flying above. She asked what those were. Gray was surprised to see the magic airship Strato Queen. He had boarded it once before with the Liquidator Subjugation Squad. It was said to be one of the biggest airships in the world. He couldn't believe they used it just for an entrance ceremony. The World Union Academy exceeded all of Gray's expectations. The airship landed and the students disembarked. Now everyone was present, and the entrance ceremony could begin. After the headmaster's speech ended, Gray looked bored. In his mind, the ceremony wasn't different from a normal one. The next part was greetings from the top students of each course. Leonhardt, the top student of the swordsmanship course, was called to the stage. As he got up and walked forward, the students gossiped about him. They heard he had defeated the examiner instantly during the entrance exam. Some said he was as good as any professor in swordsmanship. This student was Leonhard Apius. Gray watched him. Before reaching the mic, he confirmed with the heads if he could speak freely. They replied yes, and he thanked them. He then stated he had one complaint he wanted to make to the academy. Before continuing, he greeted his fellow students and all admitted students properly. He said it was an honor to be admitted to the academy with the rest of them. He told them that they should graduate as individuals capable of making meaningful contributions to the world, encouraging them to work together. He added that he looked forward to the days when they could aim high together as students of the prestigious World Union Academy. However, he expressed that among them, there were those who didn't deserve to be there. He asked Professor Ariel if he was correct, catching her off guard. She stated that all the students had passed the rigorous exams, and though they might not be as strong as him, she didn't think it wise to exclude them. Then she asked why he was asking. Leonhardt glared at her, insisting that he wasn't referring to students who had passed the exams properly. He clarified that he meant the students she had backdoored into the Divine Eye special admission. Then he dared the specially admitted student to show himself and ordered him to return his uniform and leave the academy. Tension filled the air. Gray couldn't understand why Leonhardt was so hostile, but he recalled that Leonhardt was sitting right next to him. He felt relieved that Leonhardt didn't recognize his face and figured he wouldn't get caught up in it as long as he stayed out of the spotlight. Professor Ariel acknowledged that the students that year were quite lively. Leonhardt felt that no one was taking him seriously. He called her out, demanding that she stop letting students in through the back door. She didn't respond at first, but in the blink of an eye, she leaned in and whispered in his ear, asking if he really thought he was stronger than that kid. Her move shocked the entire arena. Leonhardt was caught off guard. He gritted his teeth and said yes, asking if she was trying to prove him wrong. Professor Ariel liked his confidence and suggested a bet, which piqued his interest. She bet both her job and the kid's admission. Gray was confused by everything happening. Leonhardt turned to Professor Ariel and asked if she meant for him to fight the special admissions student. She calmly replied that she would never do anything so boring. She added that if Gray went all out, Leonhardt would be dead. As a responsible teacher, she claimed she would never put their lives in danger. Leonhardt's veins popped with anger. He felt insulted, but she merely stated facts. Instead, she suggested a safer option, a bet involving monsters. She reminded him that he was better at fighting monsters than people anyway. He glared at her but admitted that she knew him well. He asked what the actual bet was. She explained simply, each of them would fight a monster she picked. The monsters would grow stronger with each round. Whoever failed to defeat their monster first would lose. The stakes were high. If Gray lost, Professor Ariel would retire, and the special admission students would be expelled. If Leonhardt lost, he would have to do whatever she told him. She asked if he was in. Leonhardt wanted to know what kind of monsters they'd face. He was confident in his skills, but didn't want anything strange. After thinking for a moment, she revealed the first target, an ogre general. She teasingly asked if it was too easy for him. The class was stunned, but Gray didn't react. He was curious why she chose that monster. Leonhardt, on the other hand, was furious, shouting that an ogre general wasn't something a person could defeat alone. Professor Ariel clarified that they didn't have to do it immediately. They would be given a full year. Leonhardt snapped, insisting that if someone could solo a disaster-level monster in a year, people wouldn't be suffering in the first place. He yelled for her to pick something more realistic. Trying to catch his breath, he then realized her true plan. She was purposely choosing something impossible, so there wouldn't be a clear winner. But he declared he wouldn't play along. Ariel smirked and added one last condition. If the match ended in a draw, Leonhardt would be considered the winner. Basically, if Gray failed to defeat the ogre general, she would be fired, and all special students expelled. She asked for his thoughts. He looked at her as if she were crazy, feeling the bet was already stacked against him. She took his silence as agreement. He made it clear it better not be a weakened ogre general. She calmly replied that it wouldn't be. With a flick of her hand, a feather pen appeared out of thin air. She told him the terms were already written in a magic contract, and he could sign it if he had no objections. He read the contract and chose to go through with it. Still, he had to ask if she really believed the kid could win. Her answer was vague, who knows. She quietly returned to her seat. Other professors whispered among themselves, wondering what was wrong with her. Some thought she was just using the bet as an excuse to retire. It wasn't too far-fetched. She was past her prime. Gray had no choice. The bet was official, but something bugged him. Why did she include the one he defeated before enrollment when she said the time frame was a full year? She then watched him silently. Gray realized the bet was sealed the moment it started. As he stared at her, she put a finger to her lips, telling him to stay quiet. That's when Gray knew she played dirty. Eventually, the opening ceremony ended and everyone went to their assigned classes. The first subject was basic magic. Some students were surprised that the lecture started right away on day one, but as students of the academy, they had to understand that every day mattered. The professor began teaching how to use magic. It was the most basic topic. He explained that the body holds a hidden energy called ether, which could be guided through the body's magic circuits. He continued writing and explaining on the board. Gray was in the class. At first, he worried he might not keep up, but it turned out he already knew the lesson from boot camp. So far, so good. But there was one big problem. Out of all the possible classes, he ended up in the same one as Leonhardt. He silently prayed that Leonhardt wouldn't find out he was the Divine Eye special admission student. The professor noticed Gray looking uninterested and scolded him for already looking away just 5 minutes into the lecture. Gray was shocked he got caught with just a glance, even though he was seated all the way in the back. He quickly apologized. The professor challenged him. If he looked that confident, why not prove it in front of the class? He even taunted him, expecting him to use basic magic. Gray politely explained that since they were in the swordsmanship course, he assumed it was okay if they couldn't use magic. The professor replied that even sword users needed to understand basic magic to coordinate with mages. Knowing basic spells and how they felt was essential. Gray didn't expect the professor to give the same explanation as in boot camp. He asked if they would learn Ether Bullet. The professor raised an eyebrow and asked if he could already use it. Gray said yes, feeling relieved that his boot camp training hadn't gone to waste. Seeing a chance, the professor decided to set up a match. He knew Leonhardt, whom he called Leon, could also use Ether Bullet. Leonhardt confirmed that even before entering the academy, he had trained in both swordsmanship and magic, making it risky risky for another student to fight him seriously. The professor wasn't worried. He explained that even with a big difference in skill, they were just using ether bullets and no one would die. He didn't plan to ask Leonhardt to hold back either. Then the professor dropped a bomb. Gray was the Divine Eye student for the year. Everyone turned to stare at him. He knew he was in trouble. The professor grinned like a devil as he exposed everything. Leonhardt responded coldly, saying he would show Gray how things truly worked at the academy. He glared at Gray and told him to step forward. They stood face to face. The professor explained that once he gave the signal, they would fire their ether bullets at each other. Gray had only trained in magic for a few days during boot camp. Even though the professor said it wouldn't be fatal, Gray knew he probably wouldn't walk away without getting hurt. The professor gave the signal. Leonhardt was set on proving his strength. Gray had no choice and decided to go for it. Leonhardt released a small baby blue orb of light. When Gray cast his spell, a large glowing blue orb formed in front of him. The next moment stunned everyone. Even Gray was in disbelief. His ether bullet overpowered Leonhardt's, making Leonhardt shriek. The professor immediately formed a barrier in front of Leonhardt, but to everyone's surprise, it broke. It shattered, blasting Leonhardt away with a powerful gust of wind and blinding light. Other students were affected. Leonhardt let out a loud scream as he crashed to the floor. The professor rushed to his side. Leonhardt stood up, saying he was fine. The professor sighed in relief but looked at Gray, realizing that without the weakened barrier, Leonhardt could have died. Even more shocking, none of the professors could produce an ether bullet that strong. He turned to Gray and asked what he had just done. Gray was confused. Leonhardt's ether bullet felt so weak it didn't seem like the same spell. He wondered if the ether bullet he learned in the subjugation squad differed from the one taught at the academy. He asked if maybe he had used the wrong spell. The professor said no. It was definitely an ether bullet, but the quality was different. It wasn't made from regular ether, it was super compressed ether. The other students had never heard of such a thing before. The professor admitted it was a kind of power even they struggled to control. Yet somehow, Gray not only produced it, he shaped it into a spell. The professor said there was no one else in the entire academy who could pull that off. The students began whispering. It was the first time they had seen an ether bullet that powerful. Some now believed that the Divine Eye admission existed for this exact reason. Others thought Gray should have been placed in the magic course from the beginning, instead of being admitted as a special case. But in Gray's mind, something didn't feel right. All the spells he had learned at the subjugation squad boot camp were like that. Even among his group, he wasn't considered particularly talented. He asked the professor if he was joking, reasoning that with enough practice, anyone should be able to do something like that. The professor burst out laughing. Gray was confused, especially when the professor laughed even louder. Then, out of nowhere, the professor grabbed him by the shoulders, stepped into his personal space, and told him to transfer to the magic course. He even offered to personally vouch for him, explaining that Gray was more gifted in magic than in swordsmanship. Gray politely declined, saying he had always been told he wasn't good at magic. The professor looked at him as if it were the funniest joke ever. He couldn't believe Gray, someone who understood the ether compression technique well enough to create super compressed ether, thought he lacked talent. He called Gray a once-in-a-generation genius, someone even the academy would call a prodigy, and added that whoever told him he had no magical talent clearly didn't know what they were talking about. Then he asked again if Gray was really sure he didn't want to switch to the magic course. The professor was known for rarely handing out compliments, so the students were stunned. They couldn't believe he was praising someone this much. He continued pressing Gray, saying that if someone like him didn't study magic, it would be a loss for the world, and even called it a crime against magic itself. Gray let out a nervous laugh. Then something clicked. He suddenly remembered where he had actually heard about the ether compression technique before. In his previous life back at boot camp, someone had explained that in the old days, people didn't even know that Aoud, also called life force, existed. Because of that, casting proper magic had been incredibly hard. They had to keep compressing ether inside their bodies and hope that a bit of it would mix with Aoud by chance, just to create a usable spell. A woman with baby blue hair and golden eyes had called that process laughable. Now in the present, Gray asked the professor if he had ever heard of Aoud. The professor looked confused, confirming Gray's suspicion. This world still didn't know about its existence. Gray realized something significant. What he had learned in the subjugation squad was knowledge from the future. He knew he had to be careful about who he told. The professor brought the topic back and asked again if Gray was willing to transfer to the magic course. Gray gave a proper bow and apologized, explaining that he loved swords. As grateful as he was for the offer, he had to decline. The professor accepted his decision, but told Gray that if he ever changed his mind, he was welcome to come to him any time. Gray thanked him sincerely. Then the professor told him to go back to his seat and added that from now on, he wouldn't scold Gray for looking bored in class or even for leaving early, because he knew this lecture was far too basic for someone like him. The other students were impressed. They couldn't believe that Professor Carlos thought so highly of Gray. Meanwhile, Leonhardt watched him closely. He clutched his chest, his cheeks turning slightly pink as he looked at Gray with admiration. He even called him Lord Gray. Gray felt a chill run down his spine. It was honestly a little creepy. Later that day, Gray received a letter from Professor Ariel asking him to come to her office after class. The sudden summons caught him off guard. He wondered if it had something to do with Professor Carlos, and guessed she might also be planning to recommend he switch to the magic course. When he reached her office, he stood in front of the door. Before he could knock, Professor Ariel called out from inside, saying it wasn't locked. He walked in, but then was suddenly attacked. He quickly drew his sword and blocked the attack with ease. The girl who struck him was stunned. Gray realized he had reacted purely on instinct, but he still wanted to know why she attacked him. Then he got a good look at her face and was shocked. She looked familiar, like someone he had seen before. Gray took a battle stance after knocking the attacker down, but when he looked closer, he was stunned. The girl before him looked very familiar. While he was still trying to figure out where he had seen her, a voice interrupted his thoughts. The voice sounded impressed by what it had just witnessed. Looking up, Gray saw that it belonged to the red-haired professor. The lady was pleased, confirming that her eyes hadn't deceived her when she selected such a young talent. At least now, she was confident that she hadn't made a mistake in choosing her special admissions student. Two of her colleagues, who were also present, seemed far less impressed. They expressed doubts, suggesting that the green-haired girl, Bella, hadn't attacked with real intent. In their view, Ariel might have asked her to go easy on the new boy. They admitted Bella's movements were flawless, but to have her sword knocked out of her hand so easily seemed unnatural. Listening to their complaints, Gray realized with shock that the girl was none other than Belle Albright from his past life, one of the heroes from the World Union Academy who fought against the Liquidator. She was once considered the greatest sorceress in the world. Professor Ariel, however, was not pleased with her colleagues' words. Snapping at them, she suggested that the two should resign as professors if they couldn't even tell whether Bella was holding back or not. She stretched out her hand, and the two men quickly changed their tune. One of them nervously dropped a stack of coins into her palm, claiming they had only been joking. Gray watched the strange exchange with confusion until he finally asked what they were doing. Ariel explained that they had been gambling on whether he would be able to fend off Bella's surprise attack. Naturally, she had bet on him and just won a tidy sum. Out of generosity, she tossed him a coin as his share. At first, he didn't know what she had given him, but when he realized it was a gold coin, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. A single gold coin was worth a fortune. The other professors were not happy about the outcome, though they couldn't deny that Ariel was right about Gray. From their observations earlier, it looked as if he had deliberately avoided using his dominant arm, almost as though he were trying to protect it. One professor suspected it was due to an injury, though the other argued that it seemed to be something deeper than a mere muscle wound. Shocked by how much they had deduced, Gray expressed his surprise, but the men simply reminded him that they wouldn't be professors if they couldn't read such things. Ariel had already known about his condition during the entrance exam, but now that she had proven her point to her colleagues, she bluntly told them it was time to leave. She reminded them that Gray was her student and made it clear she wasn't giving him up. The professors, however, warned Gray that if his wound didn't heal in time, he would fail to meet the Academy's admission standards. With those words, they finally left. The warning left Gray anxious. He had no idea when his arm would heal. Ariel noticed his unease and quickly shifted the subject to something else, magic. She had clearly heard about his performance in class. Gray sat down with Ariel and Bella as the professor revealed that she knew about his use of super-compressed ether in Professor Carlos's class. He wasn't surprised that she had found out, but he listened intently as she explained that Carlos had even asked her to transfer Gray to the magic course. Ariel had declined, insisting that Gray was more suited to wield the sword than magic. Her remark shocked him. After all, he used a type of magic unknown to anyone in this world. Yet Ariel didn't believe he was skilled at ether compression. To her trained eye, he didn't even show signs of having practiced it. Gray realized then that Ariel's perception was far beyond the other professors. Her divine eye could see right through the facade that Carlos had failed to uncover. Recognizing that it would be unwise to lie to her, he admitted calmly that she was correct. Pleased by his honesty, Ariel pressed further, asking him to explain the trick he was using to fool everyone. She assured him that she wouldn't reveal his secret and even promised to reward him. She explained that she wasn't asking for her own sake, but for Bella's. This shocked Gray. Bella was the very same sorceress who had once taught him magic in his past life. He almost slipped and addressed her as the sorceress, but managed to catch himself. Seeing his confusion, Ariel clarified. While Bella was a genius in magic theory, she struggled in practice. She could not properly perform ether compression and therefore could not create supercompressed ether. Hearing this, Gray recalled that Bella had once been called a late bloomer, though she had eventually become the most powerful sorceress of his past life. Her academy years had been unimpressive, Ariel continued, explaining that according to Carlos, when Gray used supercompressed ether, it hadn't looked like ether compression at all. If there was a way to use such magic without compressing ether, then Bella wouldn't need to be sent to Professor Bradley. At the mention of Varian Bradley, Gray froze. Memories of the man resurfaced. An infamous figure who had conducted inhumane experiments, murdered countless people, and caused magical disasters that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Bradley was history's worst magic criminal. Yet, to Gray's shock, the man still hadn't been caught. Ariel explained that if Bella couldn't master supercompressed ether by the end of the year, she would be sent to him for surgery. Though it was claimed to enhance magical ability, it was nothing short of human experimentation. Ariel herself admitted she knew it was dangerous and would rather see Bella quit the academy than fall into Bradley's hands. Gray was horrified, especially seeing Bella's fear. Though revealing the truth about his knowledge risked altering history, he remembered the terrible future when humanity fell to the liquidator. Deciding that it was better to change the course of fate, he promised to teach Bella how to use supercompressed ether. Soon after, Gray was already training Bella in the arena. He concluded his lecture by telling her he had given her all the knowledge he possessed. Ariel honored her earlier promise by sealing the matter with a magic contract, ensuring no one could break the deal. When asked what they thought, Ariel admitted that even learning about OD had blown her mind, while Bella praised the lesson as brief, well-organized, and advanced beyond their era. She felt as though she had attended a magic class from centuries into the future. Gray, of course, didn't reveal that the lesson was borrowed from Bella herself 10 years later. Ariel confessed she couldn't yet judge the theory properly, but Bella suggested that nothing he said contradicted existing magical principles. To prove it, she quickly wrote down a spell, convinced it would work if Gray's teachings were true. She prepared to demonstrate her full strength, but Gray grew anxious. He knew that Bella's true power was said to be enough to burn an entire city, and that she had never been able to control it properly. The timid young girl raised her staff to cast a spell using Gray's teachings, and before anyone could process what was happening, a mind-blowing blast followed. Gray tried to stop her from unleashing her power, but she released the terrifying burst of flames in the blink of an eye. Everyone scrambled for cover to protect themselves from the explosion, but when Gray looked up, he noticed something strange. The overwhelming flames suddenly flowed back into Bella's staff. At that moment, he realized she had just saved his life. If she hadn't regained control at the last split second, he would have been reduced to ashes. All the flames from the devastating inferno returned to her staff, and the blue-haired girl instantly expressed her excitement. She was proud of herself for finally being able to control her power. And once she felt confident, she used the flames to conjure a massive dragon. For the first time since entering the academy, Bella Albright truly enjoyed using magic. But the joy was short-lived. She suddenly ran out of ether, felt dizzy, and collapsed. Bella fell face first to the ground, and Gray rushed to her side, calling her name and trying to wake her up. Professor Ariel, however, told him to let her rest, explaining that she had simply fallen asleep from ether depletion. Hearing this, Gray relaxed and smiled at Bella, feeling proud of her achievement. Her spell was still active even after she passed out, so Ariel took a moment to admire the magic. To her, it was a marvelous sight, and she was deeply impressed that Bella had managed to conjure magic of that scale in such a short time. Half conscious, Bella mumbled something about how Gray's theory was truly amazing, though in truth, truth, it had originally been her own theory. Now that she could easily create supercompressed ether, surgery was no longer necessary, and Ariel was eager to tell Bradley that his services would not be needed. The red-haired professor was relieved not only that Bella avoided the surgery, but also that she hadn't lost her ability to control magic. When she mentioned this, Gray was intrigued and asked what she meant. Ariel explained that Bradley's surgery might increase magical output, but it came at the expense of control. Though the details were kept secret, she knew the procedure forcibly broke a person's limiter. This was new information to Gray, but it made perfect sense. After all, in his past life, Bella had been unable to control her magic. Thanks to him, that fate no longer awaited her, since she could now create super-compressed ether. Having fulfilled his part, Ariel declared that it was time for her to honor hers. She first offered to help heal his arm, revealing that she possessed a special type of magic for it. Gray was stunned but didn't refuse, allowing her to proceed. The professor released a surge of magic into his right hand, filling the air with energy and leaving him speechless. He watched in awe as she worked to restore it, and when she finished, she asked how he felt. The moment of truth came when Gray tried to move his fingers. To his astonishment, they obeyed. Overwhelmed, he thanked her, remarking that he had never imagined magical healing could cure him so effectively. Ariel scoffed at the comparison, telling him never to equate her nerve-restoring magic with ordinary healing potions. Confident in her skill, she asked him to test whether his hand moved as it once had by swinging a sword. Overjoyed, Gray picked up a blade with his dominant arm for the first time in ages. He swung once, surprised by the result, then tried again and again, each time left speechless. Finally, he admitted to Ariel that his hand didn't move quite the way it used to. She wasn't surprised. While she had repaired his nerves, she explained, her magic couldn't heal the wounds of his soul. Gray was startled when she mentioned his soul, but she assured him he had heard correctly. Although modern magical theory had not yet proven the existence of the soul, she could see it with her divine eye. From what she observed, his soul was slowly healing and would recover naturally as long as he didn't overexert himself. He asked whether this meant he should avoid practicing swordsmanship, but Ariel reassured him it was fine to train normally. What concerned her more was discovering what kind of swordsmanship could inflict such deep damage to one's soul. Nervously, Gray laughed, hoping she wouldn't press too many questions. Ariel revealed that she knew of a style that used the soul itself to wield the sword, and she asked if he was familiar with Amy White. Gray was stunned. He shouldn't even know her in this timeline. Seeing his confusion, Ariel realized her guess might have been wrong. Though she admitted his style resembled Amy's, she noted differences that suggested his master might have been even more skilled. Still, she was confident that Amy would one day rival Gray's teacher. Gray was blown away by her insight and quick deductions, but he finally deflected, claiming he had simply trained at a dojo in his hometown. Not wanting to reveal too much, he quickly changed the subject, asking if it was really possible for swordsmanship to damage the soul. Ariel explained that ordinary swordsmanship could not. No simple technique could defeat an ogre general with a single slash, let alone cut down others around it. She revealed she already knew of his feat, having been shown the remains left at the battlefield. Even the most advanced cleaving magic couldn't have caused such devastation. That, she explained, was why she knew he possessed a mysterious inner power, and she asked him directly if he had used it. Gray froze. Curious if she could truly perceive it, he asked whether she could see the power with her eye. Ariel confirmed she could, explaining that she even saw it leaking from a chained door. Her words sent chills down his spine. The memory of that ominous door haunted him. This wasn't something anyone could guess, which meant she truly could see it. Ariel explained that she had encountered a similar power before, though not identical. Shocked, Gray asked who else could possess it. She revealed that it belonged to the Liquidator. At the mention of that name, Gray's eyes widened in horror. He couldn't believe it existed in this time period. Since he clearly understood futuristic magical theory, it wasn't surprising. He admitted that his knowledge came from the future, though few had pieced that together. When Ariel asked how much he knew about the Liquidator, he admitted only that the being was an extreme threat to humanity and had to be destroyed before it could appear. Though she thought his words were a little extreme, Ariel agreed that the Liquidator was dangerous. She then revealed that Varian Bradley was intent on continuing his experiments, and Gray was shaken, unsure of the connection. Ariel explained that she believed Bradley was attempting to summon the Liquidator itself. Gray was stunned. In his past life, the Liquidator had always been considered an alien. The idea that it had been created by a man was shocking. Yet he recalled how the Academy seemed to know exactly where the battlefield would be, which now made sense. they had been involved all along. Realizing the truth, Gray urged that Varian's experiments be stopped immediately. Ariel agreed, but admitted it would be difficult. Bradley was a professor like her, and she lacked the authority to halt his work. Though she had already appealed to the higher-ups to cancel his project, they refused. Gray demanded to know who these higher authorities were and why they would allow someone to risk apocalypse, but Ariel could not reveal their identities. Orders from above, she explained, were the only way to shut Bradley down. Disappointed, Gray realized the Academy's leadership was far more compromised than he had imagined. Still, he suddenly had an idea. If the higher-ups refused to act, exposing Bradley as a criminal might force their hand. After all, in his previous life, the man's illegal experiments had killed tens of thousands. Knowing the location of Bradley's secret lab, Gray proposed they take immediate action to catch him red-handed. That, he reasoned, would be the best way to prove he had to be stopped. Sadly, before he could even finish laying out his idea, the professor explained that this wouldn't work either. Naturally, Gray was confused when he heard this, so he asked her why they couldn't just bust the mad scientist. She told him that entering an Academy professor's research facility without permission was a very serious crime on its own. The red-haired lady made him understand that they would be the ones locked up if they couldn't produce hard evidence after breaking into the lab. She then asked Gray directly if he was trying to say he already had proof of Varian's crimes. Sadly, he didn't have any concrete evidence at that moment. He was working with the memories of events from his previous life, so he couldn't say for sure that it was the same this time. He stayed silent, confirming he had nothing solid against the shady professor. At this point, Professor Ariel suggested they shelve the whole issue for now. The conversation made Gray realize that even though she knew Varian and his experiments were dangerous, her hands were tied. There was really nothing he could do at this point, so he assured her that he understood the situation. With that out of the way, she suggested they focus on the more important matter at hand. His powers. She knew he probably wanted to learn how to control them, so she offered to help him with that. Gray was stunned because he didn't even know she had the ability to do so. Seeing the excitement in his eyes, she explained that there was actually a professor at the Academy who was very skilled at dealing with unknown forces. His name was Heathcote Longfellow, and Ariel revealed this to him. Gray was amazed because he had heard of the man before. Heathcote Longfellow was the one who trained the Sword Saint, so being tutored by someone of his caliber was a huge deal. Ariel could see how thrilled he was and wasn't surprised. She had expected this news to spark his interest. She then offered to arrange for him to start private training with Longfellow the following day. Gray eagerly agreed, begging her to make it happen. The very reason he came to the Academy was to master the mysterious power inside him, though he never expected to find a lead so quickly. The scene then shifted to an intense training session with the powerful professor. Gray was already receiving private lessons from the one and only Heathcote Longfellow, a massive opportunity for him. At first glance, it looked like the two of them were in the middle of a sparring match. Their strained expressions suggested a fierce battle, but the full picture revealed something else entirely. They were sprinting at incredible speed through the woods. Gray didn't understand why they were doing this, but he didn't complain and simply followed the professor's lead. Surprisingly, Longfellow could sense that Gray's mind was wandering. The professor wasn't going to allow that, so he told Gray to pick up the pace, since anyone with room for stray thoughts clearly wasn't focused enough. He demanded that Gray keep running until his body reached its absolute limit. Longfellow insisted that Gray continue until every drop of physical strength had been burned away, because only then would his soul's power awaken. He added that they wouldn't touch a sword as long as Gray still had even a scrap of stamina left. In other words, he would have to be on the brink of death before his new tutor was satisfied. For most people, this might have been a deal breaker, but Gray knew why he was there. He wasn't going to back down. After all, if this was the training chosen by the legendary Heathcote Longfellow, then it must have meaning. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that while he was running laps, Varian was already carrying out experiments to summon the Arbiter. He wanted to focus on the training as instructed, but he wasn't entirely sure if this was what he should really be doing. Despite his doubts, Gray continued to show up every day, and after a week, he reported back to Professor Ariel. When he met her in her office, she asked how things had been going with Heathcote. Gray explained that most of the training involved running, with a bit of sword drills at the very end. Even so, he admitted he felt a bit stronger. Ariel wasn't surprised. This sounded exactly like the kind of training Professor Heathcote Longfellow was known for. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a knock on the door. Ariel let the visitor in, and the man delivered a sealed letter before leaving. Gray watched, confused, as she opened the letter and began reading. The look on her face told him something was wrong. When he asked, she turned the paper toward him so he could see for himself. His eyes widened in horror. The letter was a report stating that Bella Albright had succeeded in producing super-compressed ether. It appeared she had gained a power resembling it, but upon closer examination, it was clear she hadn't actually compressed it. As a result, her ability couldn't be recognized as true supercompression. Therefore, the contract remained valid, and the operation would proceed as scheduled. The letter was sent by Varian Bradley himself, and after reading it, Gray was furious. To him, this was madness, and Ariel agreed. She suggested that Bradley was determined to force Bella into surgery by any means, even though she didn't need it anymore. The scientist was obsessed with achieving his goals. Gray worried about Bella and asked if she could refuse the experiment, but Ariel explained that the contract was airtight. The only way Bella could get out of surgery was if Bradley himself voided the contract. Her only options were expulsion or the operation. If she refused, she would be expelled from the academy. This was horrifying news for Gray. He slammed his fist on the table, expressing his outrage. Seeing how things were turning out, Ariel told him she needed his help, and then suddenly asked him to tell her where Bradley's lab was. The letter had pushed her past her limit and made her change her mind. She had said before that they couldn't enter another professor's lab, but now she was ready to bust the mad scientist. If they were able to expose him as a criminal, the contract would be null and void. As soon as Gray heard this, his worried expression turned into a smirk. He was excited, though also curious why she suddenly changed her stance. After all, she had just said it was too dangerous to act without proof. She explained simply that they would have to find the evidence themselves. She boldly stated this and told Gray that she was putting her faith in him. It was clear she was nervous about the plan, but she admitted she had been trusting him from the very beginning. Her divine eye had already told her he was telling the truth. She had just taken this long to fully admit it. Gray listened, encouraged by her words, and felt good about their plan. Ariel confessed her trust in him once again and asked him to lead the way. She urged him to share what he knew so they could expose Bradley together. Judging by the look on his face, it was clear that Gray was all in. Now that they were on the same page, Gray finally revealed that the evil professor's laboratory was located in the mountains near the village of Torul. Ariel was already familiar with the place. It wasn't the first time she had heard about it, and she remembered that Bradley had an academy-authorized lab there. Gray was surprised. Why would anyone perform illegal experiments in an authorized lab? But Ariel pointed out that it was the perfect cover. No one would question him for staying there too long, since it was officially his space for research. On top of that, no other professor had the authority to interfere with his work. The Toril Mountains were the ideal location for a mad scientist, but now things were different. Ariel was determined to uncover his crimes, because with evidence they wouldn't be charged with breaking into his lab. While they were still plotting their move, Bella interrupted with a knock at the door. Ariel let her in, and the blue-haired girl entered nervously holding a letter. She revealed that she had just received it, but before she could explain, Ariel snatched the envelope from her. The professor told Bella not to worry and promised to take over from there. Bella, confused, didn't know what the letter was about. She asked if Ariel was planning to fight Bradley for her sake. The idea frightened her. Even going after the mad scientist was risky enough, but Ariel seemed determined to do it alone. Seeing how anxious her student was, Ariel scoffed lightly and told her that she alone was more than enough to handle the task. This only made Bella more terrified, especially since all of it was happening because of her. Even Gray was beginning to feel concerned, so before the professor could leave the room, he called out to her, begging her to wait, and declared that he was going with her. As soon as he says this, Bella doesn't even think twice before announcing that she will go too. She is determined to help out since all of this is happening because of her. It's her problem after all, so she insists on following them. As expected, Professor Ariel is not comfortable with this sudden change of plans. Before the students can even say anything else, she stops them in their tracks and reminds them that the person they are talking about is not some ordinary man. He is an academy professor, and not only that, he is also a lunatic who has repeatedly conducted dangerous human experiments. Ariel points this out in case the two ambitious students have already forgotten. There is no telling what Bradley Varian would do to them if he caught them poking around in his business. He is just that dangerous and erratic. The red-haired professor bluntly makes it clear that she cannot allow the both of them to go to such a place. Ariel makes these points to discourage them from following her to the Toral Mountains. But sadly, her efforts backfire. Rather than seeing reason, Gray feels that everything she said only makes it more obvious that they should go with her. Since even she knows what a monster Bradley Varian is, it makes even more sense for her not to go alone. Going by herself is too dangerous, even for her, at least in Gray's eyes. In his mind, he should be able to help if he uses the same power he once used to take down the Ogre General. Besides, if Professor Ariel were to disappear, Gray would be expelled automatically, since he is a Divine Eye admission student. She is the very reason he is still in the academy, and if anything happened to her, his chances of ever becoming a hero would be gone. He lays out all of these points before finally begging the professor to at least let them decide their own fate. Her actions affect them tremendously, so he believes they should also have a say in the matter. At this point, Gray and Bella go quiet, waiting anxiously as the professor contemplates everything they have said. Ariel is not planning to be so rigid. She quietly considers his words, and after a brief silence, she gives in. With everything they've said, she knows they would probably still come even if she forbade them, so there's really no point in stopping them. That being said, the professor agrees to let them come, but under one strict condition. Gray eagerly waits to hear it, and Ariel tells them that they must prioritize their own safety first, no matter what happens. She reveals this non-negotiable rule and sternly asks if they understand. Of course, they both agree and loudly confirm that they do. If that's what it takes for them to be involved in this important mission, they don't mind. Sure enough, after that deal is made, Professor Ariel takes them along. The scene shifts to the supposedly secret lab, a massive building looming in the night. The trio arrives after the moon has risen, and while they hide in the bushes, Bella struggles to wrap her head around the fact that Varian is really doing his illegal experiments here. Professor Ariel confirms that this is the place and reminds her of their objective. Now that they've arrived, the next step is to look for evidence of Varian's experiments, just to be certain. She asks Gray to confirm this, and he assures her that they are on the same page. He remembers this place vividly from his past life and has no doubt in his mind. Seeing his confidence, Bella decides she has no reason not to trust him. She is eager to bring down the mad scientist, though she still isn't sure they can actually gather evidence without getting into trouble. Sensing her worry, Ariel attempts to calm her down. As far as she knows, Varian should be at the Magic Society's conference right now, so she is convinced he isn't here. Still, the fact that he isn't around doesn't mean sneaking in will be easy. Ariel strongly suspects the entrance is rigged with traps, so going in through the front is not an option. Instead, she concludes they'll have to bust in through the side wall. Such a move has its risks as well, which keeps Bella on edge. It's obvious the blue-haired girl doesn't have the stomach for a mission like this. She has been nervous from the start, so the professor reminds her that they are breaking into an academy-authorized lab. That alone is already a crime, so whatever method they take could land them in trouble if they don't find solid evidence. Ariel tells Bella that she doesn't have to go if she doesn't want to. After all, she insisted on coming, so if she no longer feels ready, she can still turn back. Ariel is more than willing to go on alone, but this only motivates Bella to stay. She claims she will still go, though a part of her wonders if this is really worth it. As far as she knows, Ariel is doing this for her, so she feels they may be going too far. But Gray corrects her, explaining that stopping Varian's experiments is for the sake of the entire world. It means that countless lives will be lost if they don't stop Varian. He corrects himself quickly, saying the entire world would be sacrificed. Bella is confused, not understanding what they mean. She was already anxious before, but now she looks on the verge of a panic attack. Ariel notices this and immediately tells her that Gray is probably exaggerating. Still, she agrees with him that the mad scientist must be stopped at all costs. She reassures Bella not to worry, promising that they are here for her and would put their lives on the line for her. Ariel says this with a reassuring smile, hoping to calm her student. Once the doubts and fears are put aside, the professor finally gives the signal to move out. The three of them blast forward with blistering force toward the lab, determined to find the evidence they need to take Varian down. Mid-air, Ariel casts an insanely powerful spell and unleashes a devastating blast that blows a hole straight through the side wall of the facility. So much for stealth. The explosion is so incredible it nearly knocks them back. Gray barely manages to stay on his feet, caught off guard by the sheer force. Amused, he notes how Ariel just had to go over the top. Still, the opening opening is made, and they rush inside through the gaping hole. It's a miracle the building is still standing after such destruction. Gray leads the way since he knows the layout, but the moment he steps in, his eyes widen in horror. Instead of a lab filled with evidence, he finds something much worse, a massive prison lined with cells. Inside, human beings are chained, many of them corpses, and those still alive look on the verge of death. Bloodied bodies lie scattered within the cages. This is undeniable proof of Varian's cruelty. He has been conducting inhumane experiments all along, and the evidence is far too gruesome to miss. Bella struggles to hold herself together, while Ariel is left momentarily speechless. After gathering her thoughts, Ariel observes the victims and recognizes 14 forbidden spells cast upon them. Using even one would be a criminal act, so this is overwhelming proof of Varian's crimes. The unauthorized human experimentation is bad enough, but the forbidden magic seals his guilt entirely. They continue exploring the horrific facility and soon come across something even more disturbing, a huge magic circle on the floor, surrounded by lit candles like some kind of altar. The sight is unsettling. They've already gathered more than enough evidence, so Bella hesitantly asks what they should do now. She doesn't feel right leaving while captives still suffer in the cages. Gray is the first to respond, warning that they shouldn't linger too long. If Varian returns, they'll be caught. Before he can finish, however, a sinister voice cuts through the shadow. It's Bradley Varian. Amused by their presence, he tauntingly asks if they were calling for him. He steps out of the darkness, and Ariel, unfazed, greets him with a confident smirk. She demands to know why he isn't at the conference, calling his name as his face finally comes into view. Gray is taken aback. Varian isn't supposed to be here. Something has gone very wrong, and he braces himself. The professor responds casually, explaining that he sent a double in his place. He couldn't leave because he had an experiment far too important to abandon. He gestures toward the corpses hanging in the rooms, calling them his fresh materials. Though he intended to use them, he has now changed his plans. With a terrifying smile, he admits that he prefers test subjects with greater magical potential anyway. Clearly, he means them. Varian then remarks that no one knows they came here, so if the three of them suddenly disappear, no one would ever suspect him. The message is chillingly clear. He is ready to make them his next experiment. That's it for this episode. Until next time,